Okay, so here's some feedback on some of the questions for discussion board 7. And let's start with a question from Terrell. Um, Being slightly similar to both games, where does the word rugby come from? Well, it's a toponym. It's a name. It's derived from a place or an institution in this case. The school, the public school, which in Britain really is similar to a private school in the United States, called Rugby. And that's where this kid decided when he was playing football, that is with feet, he picked up the ball and started running with it. And so the game developed at that particular school, and that's why it's become known throughout the world as rugby. Um, Lyali says, do you think that the newer generations are more politically aware of the incorrect naming of sports teams? And I guess Lyali's referring to teams like Redskins. I think so. I think that's true. I think there's a greater awareness of the fact that these terms are exonyms. Exonyms are words used by people from an outside group to describe, usually in derogatory terms, people in another group. So, yeah, I think that's true. Mitchell says, does anyone have a valid reason on why they should keep the name? And I guess he's referring to Redskins, Cleveland Indians. It's a tough one. They have a lot of history, a lot of culture, but at the same time, the words are offensive, and I don't think there's really a valid argument for keeping them. I think you can reduce the effect of them, and certainly that's what should be happening. Peter says, do you think that it's more important to have a catchy but non-descriptive team name? American teams are a highly descriptive mouthful of a team. German teams, or is it just a matter of fan preference tradition? Well, I think, the best names are the ones that have real meaning and actually originated in terms of particular teams. So one of the problems with the early franchise of MLS, they tended to take over the naming of teams and name teams in catchy ways, Chicago Fire, etc. They were kind of thought up and imposed upon teams, and I don't really think that's the way you're going to create um, teams with traditions. They have to mean something to the fans, and I don't think somebody else coming from outside and naming the team is actually going to create that. Think of Columbus Crew, for example. I think that their particular name has undergone some kind of adjustments as people really want to have a name that they can identify with. Alex C., how do other European countries name their soccer teams? Well, that's a very difficult question. It's hard to say. I mean, I can speak, say, for England, which has a wide variety of ways of naming teams. Really, they're based upon their origins. So we know that Arsenal was based upon the munitions factory that was in that particular part of London, and that's why they became known as the Gunners. Or we know that Manchester United used to really began as a railway team. They were railway workers in a part of Manchester called Newton Heath there, and so they eventually changed their name for a broader appeal. I think I mentioned the origins of the name of Sheffield Wednesday. It was a social group that, and they wanted to start a soccer team. So they said, "Well, what should we call ourselves?" And they said, "Well, we meet every Wednesday. Let's call ourselves Sheffield Wednesday." So there's lots of different ways. Interesting looking at our Soviet teams in that particular area. A lot of those were based upon industries, so that's why you have a lot of use of the term locomotive. Different teams from different parts of the Soviet world were called Moscow Locomotive and lots of other ones. Okay, next question. Cameron, what were some nicknames you had growing up? Okay, so this is the start of a lot of questions about nicknames. If you want to, if I can speak about myself, my name is Bell, so obvious ones were Ding Dong, and then the usual way of taking the name, so Bella, was another nickname. Um, my initials were D.M. Bell, and some clever clog, well, inserted a U between the D and the M, which made me Dumbbell, which wasn't very nice, but yeah, okay. Levi says, have you noticed the type of abbreviation with our culture here in the United States? If so, what kind or what words specifically? Levi's referring to the kind of abbreviations used, the anti-diminutives used in Australia, described by Wierzbicka. And yeah, I think there are equivalents here. They don't usually happen with the first name. They're more to do with the second name, I think. But I think, when you look at it, most um, cultures have, say, three names, the official name that your parents have called you, the kind of diminutive term of endearment, and then the name that's used by peers. So my daughter's Kathleen, a term of endearment used by the family Kathlini, but her friends call her Cat. Right? Um, Eli says, can you think of any anti-diminutives that you've noticed in the U.S.? If so, what are they? Sorry, I'm not thinking of any, but as I said before, they're mainly based upon the second name. I gave you that example of my daughter, and that's cat is an anti-diminutive, I would think. But a lot of them are based on the second names rather than first names. Jacob says, what is the strangest nickname you've heard somebody called, and why do you think that was their nickname? Well, there's lots of examples of kind of famous nicknames, and this is kind of refers also to another question that's coming up. So, if you think of the rapper Snoop Dogg, apparently his nickname comes from his mother calling him Snoopy because he reminded her of the Peanuts character, the Peanuts beagle, Snoopy, right? Um, this is a soccer player, Sergio Aguero, plays for Manchester City. His nickname is Kun, and Kun is because his mother and father thought he looked like this character in a Japanese cartoon, strip cartoon. Um, so a lot of nicknames are based on certain resemblances that go a long way back. Um, Jordan, what are your thoughts on women having the option to change their last name when they get married? If you are or were a girl, would you change your last name or keep it? Why? Okay, well, the first part of that, fine, yeah, I think people should have the right to choose whatever name they want, no problem. Um, if you were a girl, would you change your last name or keep it? Well, I think I would keep my name. I don't see any reason to change it. Um, Interesting, we talk about the development of feminism, and certainly it has developed a lot. But in each of the classes I've taught in language and gender, I've always done a survey with students, mainly with female students, as to whether they would change their name when they got married, and most of them would change their name, even though they probably count themselves as feminists. And the second choice would be to hyphenate it, but very few said that they would keep their own name. Carl says, I found that Americans tend to use nicknames for someone based on their names, in which I think it's too weak except for adding cursing words in it. I don't quite understand that, but never mind. Is there any examples for strong nicknames? For example, something that is fun and does not even relate to the original names? Yeah, like the ones I mentioned there, in terms of the uh, names that don't refer to their original names. Often they're based upon where a person comes from, and what particular role they play. Um, um, and then think of, Elvis the Pelvis. That's a nickname based upon his ability to swivel his pelvis. Um, are and then Miley Cyrus, apparently Miley Miley comes from the original nickname she had, which was Smiley, based upon her fact that she smiled a lot, I guess, right? So I think there's lots of examples of that. Alex K, what is it called when a nickname has no connection to the original name? It's just solely based on the appearance of how they look. I don't think we have a specific name for that. Or it tends to be subsumed under the Homeric type of nickname. For example, a person whose name is Bobby, but people think he looks more like a Fred, so everybody calls him that. Can this even be classified as a nickname? Well, yeah, sure. I mean, if it's a name that's used by a certain group of people to refer to that person, right? Yeah, this uh, a Chelsea, a Spanish a player, and I can't pronounce his name. I think his first name is Jeza. I don't know. I forget what his name is. Anyway, his nickname is Dave, and it's kind of a joke, right? they've they've given him a very kind of basic English name. Uh, Nick says, I'm a big fan of nicknames. My friends have turned my last name into all sorts of fun nicknames. Did you have any nicknames while playing sports or growing up? I think I answered that one myself, right? Ding Dong Bella, Dumbbell. Yeah. Nobody else seemed to chime in on that. I think everyone has a nickname. They probably want to forget it, but yeah, we all do. Okay, and that's it. A lot of questions. Thank you. And remember, next time is the last discussion board, so keep the questions coming. Thank you.